Welcome to the most important week of the year for the podcast industry. Welcome to Podcast Movement 2025.
Well, it's nice to see you this morning. I hope the event has been off to a great start for all of you. I'm really happy to be here with Courtney today to talk about that session about how Courtney's podcast managed to climb the search results on Apple Podcasts. Let me introduce myself real quick. I'm Irene. I'm a podcast growth expert at Ausha. And Courtney here today is the host of Insider Secrets Top 100 podcasts and the founder of PodLaunch, which is an agency dedicated to help podcasters grow their podcast strategically. Hi, Courtney. How are you doing?
Great. How are you? Happy to be here.
Yes, I am happy to be here. Happy to, start off the event. Let me maybe also tell you a bit more about Ausha, guys. I don't know if you know Ausha, maybe from name. People really don't know how to pronounce it, so you can say Ausha. It's the combination of audio sharing. Basically, we are a podcast marketing platform. We do hosting, and we also have really powerful marketing tools dedicated to help podcasters and podcast publishers grow their shows, mostly organically. So that's in-app visibility on platforms such as Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And we support over 20,000 podcast shows. Basically, our community really likes what our community really likes about us is the tools to grow your audience on those apps, and more specifically, podcast SEO. And this is something that we're going to address today, right, Courtney?
Yes, which I'm very excited about. When we first found out about Ausha, they were the only platform that was actually giving us discoverability tools to see how our podcasts were performing in search inside of apps like Apple and Spotify. So I'm really excited to dig in.
Yeah, absolutely. And then let's go.
Yes.
Let's have a look at the results. Maybe a first figure that I think it's really important to know is, why is visibility on podcast apps so important? Well, research shows that more than 50% of listeners actually find out about new shows directly on a podcast app. So that means if your podcast is not appearing on those apps, then you are probably missing out on half of your audience. And I think that figure's crazy, right?
Yes, and it's really remarkable to think about that. But think about your own user behavior, though. When you go to search for a new podcast to listen to, most of us don't go to Google. Sometimes we might hear about a podcast through a friend, word of mouth, right? But nowadays, most of us are going to YouTube, we're going to Spotify, we're going to Apple if we're looking for specific content and specifically for a podcast about that topic. And our listeners are doing the same.
Absolutely. And I think it's also important that we give more precisions about how exactly people find out about shows on those apps, because obviously there are many different ways of finding a show on an app. If we take a closer look, for example, at the Apple Podcast homepage, you can find them on the homepage through the charts tool and through the search. And this is actually what we're going to address today, because we know that more than 70% of listeners, they head straight to the search bar when they want to find a new show. And they just type in a keyword and see what's popping up. And I think that's why it's so important to be sure that you optimize your visibility in the search results.
And we'll dig into this in just a moment. But when you do type a keyword into that search bar, you're going to notice a few things pop up. And you can tab between top results. You can look for shows related to that topic or to that keyword that you're searching. And you can also look for episodes related to that. So as a podcast host, what's really remarkable about this is it gives us the opportunity to get more of our content found, because yes, our show can get found, but also individual episodes related to specific topics. So you'll see how this plays out in search as well.
Absolutely, and we see some results in a minute that confirm what you were saying. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So that's why we talk about what we call PSO at Ausha. So that's podcast search optimization. It's the whole discipline of making sure that you have the right podcast search strategy. And we have created at Ausha a tool that's called the PSO Control Panel that helps you select like the right keywords you want to focus on, track your rankings, track how your competitors are doing, and improve ultimately your ranking in the search results. But honestly, we're not going to go like into a full product demo right now, and instead we're going to focus like on a search strategy that was implemented successfully, and we're going to talk about, Courtney, your search strategy. Maybe can you tell us a bit more about like the show that you implemented PSO on?
Yes, absolutely. So Insider Secrets to a Top 100 Podcast is my show. And one of the things that I knew, I've been teaching podcasting for a long time, and well over 5 years ago, I knew that search engine optimization, of course, as we all know, for Google, for blogs and things like that, has a lot of weight when it comes to getting content found. But I wanted to see if we could do this for podcasts. At the time, there was no way to track it. So I was teaching this under the radar to people, and they were like, okay, but how do I see if this is working? And I'm like, you kind of just have to trust the process. And they were like, I don't like that answer. I want to see an ROI, This is why I was so excited when Ausha came out with this tool that we could actually see what was happening when we applied a keyword strategy. So one of the things that I knew was I wanted to be sure that if my podcast is a podcast about podcasting, there are plenty of podcasts out there about podcasting, and I wanted to make sure that my show was appearing at the top of the search results, or as close to the top of the results as possible, for topics that I knew my listener was searching for. So that's what we're about to dig into. We launched our show back in 2020. This was right before the wave of all the 2020 podcasts that came on, so I was doing it before it was cool, But one thing I do want to point out here is that our primary categories that our show is positioned in, the parent category is the business category. But on the back end of your podcast hosting platform, you can select specific categories. We're positioned in marketing, entrepreneurship, and how-to. And the category is also important when it comes to your SEO strategy or your PSO strategy, and we'll see that play out here in just a minute as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe we can start seeing some results of like before and after implementing the PSO strategy. So like the figures that we took went over a period of 5 months, starting beginning of the year and ending like at the beginning of June. And just after like rolling out your PSO strategy, you managed to have 12 different keywords, Courtney, appear in the top 5 in the search results on Apple and Spotify, and 14 in the top 10.
Yes, meaning when a listener types in any one of those 12 or 14 keywords, for the 12, we were appearing in the top 5 for those keyword search results, which is before the listener scrolls, so it's one of the first 5 that listeners see. And then 14 in the top 10, so even if they were to scroll once, our podcasts or our episodes would still be appearing in that search.
Yes, absolutely. Can you tell us a bit more about like the type of keywords that was exactly?
Yes. So some of the keywords we knew were, obvious ones that were pretty broad in nature, like podcasting, right? If someone's looking for a podcast about podcasting, they're probably going to type podcasting into the search bar. But also, if you know anything about traditional SEO, typically you want to avoid keywords that have a high search. Use that keyword a lot more frequently throughout all the written messaging of whatever it is that you're optimizing for, a blog post, your podcast in this instance, in order to have, that edge on the competition to be able to appear in those search results. So I really took, we were looking at narrower keywords that I knew were more specific and detailed to our audience, but also a couple of those broad keywords that I knew generally would be searched. And then with the help of Ausha's dashboard, we were able to actually then see how those were performing. And so we kind of that was our approach there. It was kind of a mix of the two. A bit broad, but also a bit more specific to start.
And it's always important to have like those main 5 to 10 keywords that like directly relate to your content, but also like more maybe niche keywords that are less popular, but that like if the audience finds you on those keywords, they will be very qualified and like more like it will be more probable that they engage with your content and stuff.
A great example of that would be like video podcasting. I have certain episodes on video podcasting, which is a very hot topic keyword, but it doesn't apply to all of my episodes, but certainly more niche in that if someone is searching for that and then it matches them with those episodes.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
It delivers what they're searching for.
Let's maybe take a closer look at some specific keywords that we are talking about. We could talk about the keyword podcast marketing. Before running out the PSO strategy, you were appearing in the search results, but really like your show was at the bottom of the results, in the around position 100. And after working on PSO, you managed to land the 3rd place, and congrats on that, because that's really huge. How did you do you have any comments about that? Or
yes, it's very exciting to see that, of course, when you actually can see, okay, the efforts that I'm putting into my show are paying off. But with podcast marketing, this is something that our show touches on specifically. We do it in a way that's unique to other podcasts that might be appearing up in these search results. But again, this was a keyword that was a little bit more niche that I knew we wanted to be ranking for. And so to move, from position 100 in the search results up to position number 3 in a short period of time, and we were talking 5 or 6 months here over the course of this study, and even sooner than that, because we did start ranking sooner than that for this particular keyword, was really great to be able to see those results and to have that confirmation of knowing that, okay, now my listeners that are searching for this can actually find me as well.
Yeah, I agree. That's crazy. And you even had, I think for a specific keyword, you had one of your top episodes feature in the first place. That was the keyword podcasting strategy. I think that's a really good example of what Courtney was talking about just a minute ago about how you can feature one of your episodes alongside with one of your shows so that multiplies the possibility of appearing in the search.
Exactly. Yeah, and that the show there is appearing in position number 3, but that's actually an episode that's appearing in position number 1 for that keyword.
Sure. And then we start talking a bit more about the strategy. I think there's a really interesting results. It was the keyword podcasting, where you managed also to climb, I think, more than 90 positions and land in the 3rd position. Podcasting is a really, really, really highly competitive keyword. It's really difficult to rank on that one, obviously. What was your strategy? Could you maybe explain, how did you break through?
Yes. So the very first thing, if I were to give you a high-level look at what our strategy looks like, the first thing we do is we analyze the competition. And you'll want to do this for a podcast in your specific niche. What other podcasts are talking about your topic in your category that listeners might search for and might find on a menu of options to choose from? And so I kind of analyze the competition. What are podcasts out there about podcasting? What are they talking about? And then from there, developed a keyword list for my show. And like Irene mentioned, about 10 to 15 core keywords that we knew we wanted to rank for. Podcasting, even though I knew it was highly competitive, was one that I also knew was absolutely being searched because it was highly competitive. So for this particular keyword, we had to use this keyword a lot more frequently in the written messaging of the podcast in order to gain these positions in terms of the search results. For more niche topics, you may not have to use that keyword as frequently. And the beauty about the dashboard is you'll be able to actually see how many times that keyword is being used in the written messaging. So I think for podcasting, this keyword appears at this point now, it's probably over 1,500 times throughout the written messaging of our podcast, but worked very naturally in because this is what our podcast is about. So it's pretty easy to naturally work that into the text. Whereas other keywords like video podcasting, for example, or even podcast marketing are easier to rank for. And so our strategy kind of looks at, which keywords do we know we want to be ranking for? Based on the popularity of that keyword, how often do we need to be utilizing that in our metadata, or that's just the fancy way of saying the written messaging of your podcast, and then just utilizing and being very mindful of that when we go to create a podcast title, when we go to write those show notes for that episode, and a couple of other things that we'll get into here in a minute of where you can plug those keywords very naturally into the text.
Yeah, sure. And it's really important to have the step-by-step strategy, just to make sure that you implement the right things in the right moment. Maybe we can start then talking about your metadata strategy. And maybe before we use the term metadata, maybe just explain what that is exactly and why it's so important for search.
Yes. It's one of those things that it's kind of makes your eyes glaze over. Metadata, I don't know what we're talking about here, but really it's just any kind of written text for your podcasting. So think everything from the name field of your podcast to the episode title fields of your podcast. Obviously, your podcast description, your episode summaries or your show notes, anything written, even the transcripts that Apple and Spotify now crawl and they pull the transcripts from the audio. You want to make sure that you're speaking those keywords into your episodes as well as you're talking about that topic, so that it naturally pulls up in the transcript. And so the way that Apple and Spotify typically crawl, all the written messaging of your podcast and the apps is they'll look at if you're familiar with traditional SEO, like the header 1, header 2, you might have heard some of these terms before. Essentially, they're giving a lot of priority to keywords that they find in the name field of your podcast and in the episode titles of your podcast. And then they're also looking at, essentially, what's in this description? What is this episode about? Because Apple and Spotify's job is to match listeners with content. So you can kind of think about, okay, all I'm doing here is giving Apple and Spotify a map to follow to help those listeners find my show. So whenever we say metadata, that's all we're referring to is really just the written messaging of the podcast. Anywhere that if you were to open up your app, anything that you see is written, that's metadata. And that's what we want to essentially be communicating to Apple and Spotify. Here is what this episode is about. Here's what this topic is about of this show, so that listeners who are searching now, you can match them with this content.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for clarifying that, because that's really the core of the PSO strategy as well. Okay, let's break down the strategy then. Okay, what's the first step that you would recommend like podcaster and podcast publishers to take in order to like implement the right PSO strategy?
Yes. So one of the things that I recommend, if you look at your podcast right now, so first things first, analyze your competition. I'll be talking about this more on Thursday. If you guys want to come catch my talk, we'll dive deeper into that. But look at your competition. What's already being talked about? Think about your listener intent. What are they likely to be searching for? And then with a tool like Ausha, you can easily see now how much search volume does this particular keyword have. You want to make sure that people are actually searching for it, otherwise it really does you no good. But then you also want to notice how difficult is it to rank for a particular keyword. And so this is really helpful information to have because you can see up there with podcasting, there's a high search volume for that keyword and relatively high competition. Podcast marketing doesn't have quite as high of search volume, pretty much around the same competition. And so I know for, just looking at this right here that I can easily say, okay, well, podcasting and podcast marketing are keywords that I want to incorporate much more frequently into my written messaging. Now, podcast advice, same kind of thing here. Podcast psychology is, a much more niche topic. And so this is something that maybe not as many listeners are searching for, but that is highly relevant to my show. So don't be afraid to utilize that as well. Essentially, when you are looking at what do we optimize, where do we plug these keywords in, you want to work them very naturally into the text. So I had a question from someone one time, and they said, can I just take all of my keywords and plug them into every episode title and make sure I'm getting as many of them in there as possible? I'm like, well, yes, but no, don't do that, right? Because Apple and Spotify are going to be like, okay, I see what you're doing here, and so the same kind of SEO, black hat practices, keyword stuffing and things like that are down, thumbs down on in terms of Google is the same thing here as well. We don't want it to seem obvious that we're keyword stuffing or using these keywords. You want to work them in very naturally into your episode titles. Where can I work these keywords naturally into the show notes? And can I just tweak some of the words? There might be an episode where I might have used the word podcast, and I went back through older episode titles and said, okay, now I'm going to say podcasting instead, where it makes sense.
Absolutely. And can you tell us a bit more, in a concrete way, in just maybe a minute, how do you work on the titles and the description work in terms of metadata?
Let me see a quick show of hands. How many here have an existing podcast of 10 episodes or more? Great. Keep your hand up if you have 20 episodes or more, 50 episodes or more, 100 episodes or more, 200 episodes or more. Okay, awesome. So a lot of you have, you might be sitting here going, oh my gosh, that's a lot of work. I have 200 episodes. I don't know. How am I going to optimize this? So I'm going to give you a couple of quick hacks. So if your podcast hosting provider has an episode footer feature, this is usually at the episode level. You can log in and you use this kind of like an email signature. It gets appended onto every single episode. Go in there and work in your top 2 to 3 keywords as often as you can naturally in the text. This is our call to action footer at the bottom of every episode because these are links that I'm always referring to in episode. Come join me for my live workshop, come book a podcast audit, so on and so forth. And now all I did was I went and plugged in specific keywords into the footer, and it auto applies to all the episodes of your podcast, immediately increasing the frequency of that keyword in your metadata. So I would say that's step number 1, especially if you're short on time. Step number 2 would be, do we have the name slide here? I'm going to show that as well. Is that this one? Perfect. Okay. So with this one here, you can also look at your podcast name. And for many of you, you might be like, okay, shoot, my top keyword is not in my podcast title. What do I do? In this case, you could add a very keyword-specific tagline in the name field of the podcast. It does not have to go on your cover art. It just goes in the name field of the podcast. Whereas here we have podcasting strategy for business growth. That's very strategic for 2 reasons. Number 1, it gives listeners exactly what to expect from this show compared to other podcasting shows. We're not talking tech here. But this is also telling Apple and Spotify, hey, these are the type of listeners that I want you to match me with. People who are interested in this topic and or searching for this particular topic. So those are 2 really quick, easy takeaways, quick hacks that'll take you 10 minutes or less, and that will automatically give you a leg up on the competition in terms of starting to rank your podcast for search. Oh, this is another good one. Do we have time to dig into this one?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay, real quick.
1 minute.
So, all right, so with your show description, something else you can do, and again, we want to work keywords in naturally, and because we always want our listeners to be first and foremost in front of mind, this can be a helpful guide that you can add at the very bottom of your podcast episode, your podcast description, the about section of your podcast, where essentially you're saying, okay, popular guests that have been on this podcast include these guest names, because now what? If you have someone that's looking for those specific specific people and or their podcasts, your content is going to be more likely to pop up. And popular episode topics down there at the bottom, you could literally include your keyword list of your 10 to 12 keywords of the popular topics that you talk about on that podcast. And it gives you one more place to easily plug those keywords in without having to go back and like optimize every individual episode.
Absolutely. And maybe before we wrap up, I wanted to show like maybe the most tangible figure in terms of results that you can get with the PSO strategy with it, which is like the impact on your downloads, Courtney.
Yeah.
Which is like after just 1 month on working on PSO, you got an increase of 40% in downloads, knowing that you used, I think, if I'm not mistaken, no other like promo channels at that time, right?
We were doing no other marketing. We were only testing podcast SEO. We track these numbers every month for the podcast, and it actually wasn't until recently where you were like, did you see an increase in downloads? I'm like, I think we did. I don't know, let me go back and look at the numbers. Sure enough, in 1 month of just using podcast SEO, 41% increase in downloads of people finding the show, specifically through search.
Thank you so much, Courtney, for taking the time to review all of those results together. And of course, that like a skilled operator implements. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of that. If you guys want to know more about PSO and our tool, we have our booth just right here. We have a PodWord station where you can like, without endlessly scrolling, just typing your show and type in a few like keywords and see, okay, am I appearing in the search results? Works for any country, any show. So feel free to take a look, and yeah, we'd love to tell you more in person. We can also take some questions by the side of the
whatever
stage
questions you'll have related to strategy, I'm happy to answer as well, right over there.
Thank you so much, Courtney, for your time.
Yes,
and
thanks,
don't miss
Irene.
Courtney's session on Thursday.
Thank you.